Dark winged beasts circled ominously above the looming castle. A gaping hole marred the castle's ancient wall. The valiant Burmat and his 4 loyal comrades journeyed to the domain of the magic Count Helma, determined to vanquish the final demon kings. The heroes sprinted down the corridor. Having defeated 3 of the 5 kings, only 2 remained standing. An endless horde of demons barred their path, threatening to overwhelm them. Grasping his sword firmly, the warrior lunged forward, the blade glowing with fierce energy. An immense explosion erupted, shaking the battleground. His eyes ignited with a fierce glow, the legendary Burmat in his full glory. The young woman pursued him, her swift feet barely touching the ground. A confident smile crossed her lips. Her magic would be flawless. Her staff radiated a brilliant light, a beacon against the swarming monsters. Suddenly, a towering flame erupted before her, illuminating the darkness. She smiled proudly at her triumph, wise Senya at her most powerful. Nearby, the priestess stood solemnly. Light streamed from her hands as she blessed the souls of the fallen. Without hesitation, a demon lunged at her from behind, but with a single swift motion, she severed its head. A satisfied smile graced Saint Anna's face at her decisive strike. The decapitated creature collapsed lifelessly onto the floor. The warrior hefted his axe high above his head. With one powerful swing, he swept down multiple foes in a single, crushing blow. The remains of the defeated scattered wildly across the hall. He cracked a grin, eyeing the fearless madman before him. Suddenly, the fiery-haired warrior dashed past him with lightning speed. He shouted furiously, cursing his companion for blocking his path yet again. A throng of enemies crowded before him, threatening to overwhelm. His eyes burned with fury as the redhead launched a relentless series of attacks. She unleashed a rapid succession of precise and deadly strikes. He glared at them fiercely, reckless Hamal undeterred and bold. Then, with a measured calm, he slid his weapon back into its sheath. Standing behind the blonde, the man nursed his envy of Burmat. He always called him a rival hero, though no one ever took those claims seriously. The group gathered firmly at the center of the vast hall. Amal scanned the surroundings, noticing only a handful of enemies remained. Suddenly he called out to the blonde warrior. Something fast was closing in on him, but the redhead shielded him with his own body. Blood spilled from his mouth in a grim sign of injury. The demon sneered, mocking them with a chilling laugh. A gaping wound carved through his chest as he collapsed onto the floor. The monster braced itself, preparing for another brutal strike. It thrust its arm outward with ominous intent. Burmat swiftly dodged the attack and closed the distance. He lunged fiercely, slicing the creature cleanly in 2. Blood spatters decorated the battlefield around them. The others rushed to the injured man's side without hesitation. The blonde sheathed his weapon, bowing his head in solemn respect. He refused to perish in such a manner. Emil smiled faintly, convinced this was an honorable death. In his final moments, he deeply lamented having been insincere with his comrades. He stretched out a trembling hand, urging that every enemy be vanquished. His friend grasped it firmly, locking eyes and pledging in the hero's name to eliminate all the demon lords. Hearing this vow filled Emil with hope and relief. The priestess folded her hands as the boy requested a prayer on his behalf. The warrior regarded him with irritation, while the dying man declared he was the bravest soul he had ever known. Zenya's tears streamed freely down her cheeks. He glanced toward her truthfully, just as a leg suddenly appeared. The boy stomped angrily on the book, shouting that he never liked it and wished he had never read those words. Clenching his fists, he trembled with frustration, vowing that if he ever discovered the author, he would confront him fiercely for writing such a book. He casually picked up the book, and they always gave these legendary figures striking nicknames: great, wise, holy, fearless. But why was this man called Rash Hamal? Was the term rash coined by the very person he defeated 300 years ago? He tossed the book over his shoulder, and the same dismissive attitude extended to his team. Why did they turn a blind eye to such a careless insult, failing even to defend the honor of their comrade? The blonde recollected the moment of death with vivid clarity. They doubted whether anyone would acknowledge the chance of the hero's rebirth, carrying all his past memories within him. The boy furrowed his brow. Emil had died 3 centuries ago during the brutal conflict against the 5 demon kings. The hero averted his gaze, lost in thought. A painting adorned the wall. It portrayed a warrior wielding a sword, symbolizing a reincarnation within one of the hero's descendants. The young man gazed at the portrait. Eugene, aged 13. Burmat stood at the center, surrounded by admiring women. Beyond his first wife, he maintained a sizable harem. As he donned his training gear, he couldn't recall ever chasing after women. Had his perspective changed with maturity? Such shifts are natural with age. Consider the family tree. Only the children of Burmat's first wife are recognized as his direct heirs. Despite the shared surname, Eugene is deemed merely a descendant from a collateral branch. He gripped the training sword firmly. Offspring from collateral branches are prohibited from practicing magic or wielding real swords until they undergo the blood inheritance ritual. He glanced at the weapon and felt satisfied with his wooden sword, but today marked the final moment he'd wield this fragile stick. The man swung forcefully, striking the dummy repeatedly with relentless energy. With one more powerful strike, the dummy shattered apart and a broken piece tumbled to the ground. He stared at the wreckage with a mix of doubt and unease. Standing behind him, another man observed silently, nodding yet again how the dummy had been destroyed. The boy spun around, revealing that it was his father standing there. The boy's muscular physique showcased prominent veins coursing across his skin. His father regarded him with a puzzled expression. Such a robust frame seemed unusual for a 13-year-old, and to be honest, he doubted he could defeat his own son in a fight. The boy met his father's gaze with a fierce intensity. Eugene was his son, yet at times he was intimidating. His words and demeanor lacked any childish innocence, replaced by eyes that radiated a chilling resolve. The father studied his son thoughtfully, recalling that though Eugene had grown up motherless, not a day passed when sadness touched his heart. Eugene kicked the dummy's foot, silently condemning their blacksmith's poor craftsmanship. His face burned with indignation. How could anyone charge for such shoddy work? The culprit deserved punishment, but his father was far too lenient. Clearing his throat, the man resolved to deliver a firm scolding. Sunlight streamed across the house's walls. Tomorrow would bring the dreaded blood inheritance ritual. The boy stared at him with cold detachment, a ritual steeped in fear and held once every decade, the blood inheritance tradition. Wearing a coat of arms emblazoned with a lion, all children aged 10 to 15 from both the main family and its branches gathered at the primary family estate to take part. The youngsters proudly displayed their talents before the competition commenced, determining who would earn the right to carry the Lionheart name. Eugene rested on his wooden sword. Unlike descendants from the side branches, those from the main line were permitted to practice magic and wield real weapons. This was designed to prevent the main branch's weaker children from falling to their side branch counterparts. The father stared at the fallen mannequin, Eugene's remarkable talent blurring the line between reality and resemblance. If only he'd been born into the main family. He glanced at his trembling hand, thinking that had he been as untalented as himself, he wouldn't have to endure the painful gap between his potential and the harsh truth. Noticing his distress, the boy inquired about his condition. He replied that everything was fine. With a sigh, Eugene reflected on the thought that perhaps he hadn't been the father his son deserved. The man placed his hands firmly on the boy's shoulders, looked him directly in the eyes, and warned him never to cross paths with children from the main branch. No matter his gifts, he wouldn't stand a chance, as they were trained in magic and armed with real weapons from a young age. The boy gave his hand a reassuring pat, assuring he wouldn't, but inwardly he knew such restraint existed only in his dreams. He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile, thinking it was merely a tedious skirmish among children, exhaustingly tiresome. Eugene turned toward the other mannequin and strode confidently in its direction. The blood inheritance ritual requires participation from 3 children of the main family line as well as 6 from its auxiliary branches. He explained that the trio from the main family consisted of the son of the family head's first wife and the twins born to his concubine. Aside from the 2 children from the principal side branches, the rest held no significant standing. With a resolute swing, the boy lifted his sword and shattered it with a single, powerful strike. The hero's ominous smile deepened as he pondered the true strength of Burmat's lineage. The carriage rolled away from the gates of the estate, moving steadily into the distance. Gazing out the window, Eugene reflected on his past life as Hamel, recalling his self-assured genius. From an early age, he dominated every fight and swiftly mastered new skills, advancing at a far quicker pace than his peers. Emil frowned, prompting him to repeat what he had just said. Burmat crossed his arms and lamented that with just a bit more effort, the redhead could have become remarkably stronger. Pointing to the sword, he argued that it was clear the boy fought at his absolute limit, giving everything he had. Sweat streamed down his face. He reminded himself that not everyone possessed his level of talent. Unlike Burmat, who was truly a genius, he was not. The blond man observed calmly, a master of both swordsmanship and magic, revered as the god of war, the legendary Great Burmat. Admired by the crowd, he was a duke in his homeland but declined the title. Until the very end, he was celebrated as a great warrior. The boy rested his head on his hand, but the others remained attentive. The witch stood before the tower, Senya, a prodigy born in the realm of magicians, who became the youngest master ever crowned within the magical tower. The monks bowed reverently before Priestess Saint Anna, revered as the holiest figure across the entire Holy Empire, with scriptures dedicated to her sacred teachings. The warrior stood crowned, the fearless moron, unbelievable, yet he founded a kingdom bearing his own name. With a single tap of his finger, he ensured they all lived happily ever after until their final breath. Frustrated, he slammed the armrest, questioning why the Demon King was still alive despite recalling his death. His comrade had vowed to eradicate every Demon King, pledging complete annihilation. As a dove soared past the carriage, it symbolized his demise in a castle of magical captivity. Immediately following his death, this fair-haired man forged a pact with the Demon King, birds trailing the carriage, and thanks to that alliance, the war with demons finally ceased. 3 centuries later, peace continues to prevail over these lands. A man approached him, nodding his visible nervousness. He smiled warmly at the young man, offering reassurance. With a confident wink, he hinted that upon arrival, he would face great challenges, already showing signs of anxiety during the carriage ride. Eugene departed, expressing gratitude to Lord Gordon for his valuable guidance. The carriage rolled steadily through the forest, now entering the territory of the main estate. The Lord shook his head, signaling that it was not yet time to disembark. The manor remained a distant sight. Eugene couldn't grasp why he was flaunting so much. Didn't managing such an extensive domain seem overwhelming? The man reassured him, explaining that numerous portals scattered across the region made everything manageable. He replayed their conversation silently, wondering why the man was traveling by carriage if they weren't authorized to use the portals, a detail that struck him as oddly amusing. The horses steadily trotted and plodded along the path. Gordon gestured toward the entrance. "Welcome to the Patriarch's estate," he announced. The boy furrowed his brow, showing a hint of displeasure. They proceeded down the grand avenue. The boy offered a faint smile. The welcoming ceremony was evidently unprepared for his arrival. Along the road, banners waved in the breeze, displaying a lion's shield set against a vibrant blue backdrop. Eugene placed his hand over his heart. Only those descended from the main line were permitted to bear the lion crest on the left side of their chest. The Lord beckoned him forward. No one else had arrived yet, suggesting he was the first guest. He then requested to be guided to the guest quarters. The estate basked under the warm glow of the sun. A maid named Nina bowed gracefully and introduced herself, assuring them she would attend to all their needs during their stay. She handed over a bell, explaining that ringing it would summon assistance whenever necessary. She gently placed the bell on the table. At least he had the comfort of a personal maid assigned to him. The boy sat on the bed, noticing how young the maid appeared. He wondered just how old she was. 16, he mused, recalling that she must have only recently completed her schooling. They assigned her an unskilled servant, intending that if any issues arose from his inexperience, all the blame would be conveniently placed on him. Whoever conceived this plan clearly aimed to undermine the hero. The boy folded his arms and asked if she knew when the others were expected to arrive. She replied that they would come within 4 days. He rose from bed and requested that she take him to the training grounds. The girl, puzzled, consented without hesitation. At the center of the courtyard stood a graceful fountain. A lion emblem adorned the right side of the boy's chest as he asked once more for the name of the other boy. The girl, bearing the same lion crest, softly replied, "Eugene. He is their age." The children stood near the wall, and the boy overheard that Eugene hailed from a small western provincial town in the empire. He was probably more accustomed to wielding a rake than a sword. He pinched his nose, nodding. The carriage reeked of foul animal waste. Although this boy was their peer in age, he would be held accountable if he damaged their property. The girl chuckled and said, "Exactly, he deserves to be punished." Proudly, the boy declared they wouldn't punish him, only warn him for being too lenient, she added. Another boy noticed them, observing the girl through the window. She turned her gaze directly toward him. Startled, he pulled the curtain closed. She smiled warmly. Eugene was diligently training in the open field. He gripped a wooden spear firmly in his hands. He lunged forward, raising the spear high as he relentlessly practiced his attack techniques. He never shirked from training, but in this life, his efforts had to be far more intense. The boy lunged forward, swinging the spear with fierce determination, convinced that no matter how much he pushed his body to its limits, he remained untouched by illness, and nearly all his wounds mended within a single day. He gripped the weapon firmly as dust scattered from his powerful swing. He practiced another strike, showcasing the remarkable abilities of a body fueled by the proud blood of Burma, surpassing all expectations. Eugene thrust the spear forward with precision. The servant observed everything in awe. Despite the sandbags and the heavy spear he wielded, his movements were surprisingly agile. Suddenly, someone called out to her. Two children approached the girl, asking curiously what she was doing. The maid, startled, asked why they had come here. He pointed to the boy with the spear, reminding her that he had asked why he was there. A sudden thud echoed against the ground. Eugene still held the spear. "Can't you see, he's training with it?" He resumed his rigorous training, muttering curses under his breath. His sister leaned in, whispering that he had been insulted. Zion's face twisted with fury. He shouted indignantly, shaking his fist, demanding an apology. Eugene remained stoic, offering a simple but sincere apology. The boy was uncertain how to respond. He clenched his fist again, accusing Eugene of insincerity and insisting he bow properly to show true remorse. After all, weren't they the same age? With a sigh, the boy wondered why he should bow to a friend. He gestured wildly, protesting that just sharing a last name didn't make them equals or friends. The sister turned to her brother, reminding him about the carriage waiting for them. Zion jabbed her finger toward her conversation partner and demanded he wash the carriage he arrived in. It must be reeking from the animals he tends. Eugene glanced over without any sign of interest. He turned to the servant and confirmed that she was his personal maid. She nodded in agreement. Pointing to the side, he instructed her to clean the carriage, and she immediately bustled off in that direction. The boy, wearing a dark jacket, seethed with anger. He confronted him sharply. How dare he delegate a task meant for him personally to a servant after receiving the order directly? Clutching his chest in defiance, the boy who openly disrespected his commands was Zion. Eugene smiled warmly, introduced himself, and expressed pleasure at meeting him. The girl waved back and introduced herself as Seal. Her brother was enraged by this blatant disregard for his orders, signaling that he intended to be unforgiving. He noticed the training sword nearby. Grabbing it, he held the sword before him and declared that the insult demanded a duel. Upon hearing this, Eugene simply smiled. The children faced each other as Eugene noted how impulsive it was to label the confrontation a duel. He raised a hand to his temple, silently suggesting to leave the matter be, yet he teasingly asked if the boy was afraid. Our protagonist fixed a cold, unwavering gaze upon him. Zion grinned broadly, brandishing the sword. "Scared of me? Then you'd better bow down and beg for mercy." Eugene spread his arms wide and retorted, "What reason do I have to be afraid? I neither wish to fight nor to plead for forgiveness." Zion pointed accusingly and declared his refusals, as if ready to flee. Clearly, his parents had never taught him the true meaning of honor. A heavy weight crashed onto the ground with a thud. The heir apparent appeared puzzled, but explained that the challenge was for a duel. He discarded another weight, daring Zion to throw down his gauntlet in response. He removed his chain mail with determination and let it drop heavily to the floor. Fear gripped Zion as he realized the man had been training relentlessly with those heavy weights, not merely showing off. Eugene carefully took the heavy bag off his spear. His sister watched eagerly, knowing he had issued the challenge himself. If he backed down now, she'd mock him forever. Zion pulled out a handkerchief, determined to defend what little honor he had left. He threw the handkerchief to the ground, boldly challenging Eugene to a duel. The handkerchief fluttered to the earth as the weighted bag clattered heavily off the spear. Our protagonist locked eyes with his rival and accepted the challenge without hesitation. Witnessing this, Seal felt a surge of surprise. With fierce resolve, our young hero struck the spear hard. The force of the blow caused drool to escape from his opponent's mouth. Our boy remained silent, watching intently. The strike knocked the sword from his opponent's grasp and sent him crashing to the ground. Clutching the spear triumphantly, Eugene declared his victory. His sister rushed to his side, anxiously asking if he was all right. He struggled to catch his breath but ended up vomiting. Angrily, the girl glared at the boy and began to scold him, condemning his cowardice and insisting that this duel lacked any true honor. Eugene crossed his arms, perplexed. What cowardice was she referring to? By the rules, the duel commenced the instant the handkerchief dropped to the ground. Losing focus was entirely his own fault. She wagged her finger at him, insisting, "That's true, but hasn't he been training and practicing mana all along?" The boy discarded the spear defensively. Children from the branch families are strictly forbidden to master mana until the blood inheritance ceremony, she declared, accusing him of deceit. Without mana, he could never have wielded such a heavy weapon with such ease. Seal's brow furrowed. His assault was so lightning quick that even if her brother had been completely ready, blocking it would have been impossible. Eugene smiled thoughtfully, resting his hand on his chin. Clearly, his sharp gaze was more than mere pretense. She frowned as she noticed he had an unusually long tongue. "People often say that about you," she murmured. Rewinding to the duel's decisive moment, it wasn't that her brother had been passive. When the spear nearly caught him, he instinctively leapt backward to lessen the blow's impact. Given his scant real combat experience, his reflexes were surprisingly sharp. Eugene narrowed his eyes. This opponent shows great promise, yet he's still far from embodying the true legacy of Burma. Cyan rose to his feet, clasping his chest, and branded him a coward. Eugene chuckled softly. They really are twins, even their speech patterns mirror each other. He stepped closer to the fallen rival, whose mouth was smeared with vomit. If he truly considered himself a worthy heir of the family name, he should acknowledge defeat with dignity. Upon hearing this, Cyan abruptly turned away. Victor folded his arms, realizing he might have acted too boldly. If this had been done to someone from the main line, they certainly wouldn't have ignored it. A man was approaching them steadily. His expression was tight with tension. The hero studied him closely. No lion emblem adorned his chest, suggesting he was merely a knight. Yet his formidable strength was undeniable, leaving a striking impression. The child suddenly burst into tears, burying his face in his arms, lamenting that he'd been defeated by a simple country boy like him. His face flushed deeply as he admitted he had challenged the boy to a duel and lost. The man paused thoughtfully, then turned his gaze toward the boy. He bowed respectfully and apologized for not introducing himself earlier. His name was Hazare, and he was responsible for training Cyan. The boy met his gaze and replied that his name was Eugene, hailing from the city of Gittel. A short distance away, the girls stood silently. The teacher knew the Gerard family originated from that city. This man was the boy's father. But then he locked eyes with the boy and demanded to know what had transpired here. Our protagonist didn't avert his eyes. Cyan had dared to challenge him to a duel and insult his father. The boy beside the man looked anxious, denying the claim. He went on to assert that his father had supposedly failed to teach him honor before branding him a coward. Frowning, he argued that this meant not only him but also his father had been insulted. How could anyone believe such an offense wasn't reason enough to accept a duel? Hazare pondered the situation carefully. He guided Cyan gently away, offering to tend to his injuries. The girl waved farewell to our protagonist, hoping they would meet again soon. In response, the boy returned her wave. Later, he was seated at the table enjoying his meal. He noticed the maid had returned, clutching notes in her hand. Her gaze fixed on him as she relayed details about his assignments. Young Masters Deacon, Hansen, and Jules would arrive by noon, while the gargoyles Desira would come through the portal later that evening. He took a bite of meat and learned they would assemble sooner than expected. The ritual was about to commence shortly. Afterward, the man departed the house. The sun cast its light over the crimson Burmat carpet. He lifted his head, preparing to reprimand his descendants, hoping his disappointment wouldn't run too deep. Raising his fist, he admitted he personally wished not to be reborn as any of his descendants, then smiled wryly. Cyan stood before the girl, his gaze dropping down in confusion. The brown-haired woman closed her fan and explained that her son had challenged a boy from a lesser branch to a fight and lost. She was Anasilla, the main family's second wife. Hazare bowed his head, acknowledging the truth of her words. Anasilla smiled faintly at her son, motioning for him to come closer. Cyan approached his mother, guilt evident on his face. The brown-haired woman jabbed her fan lightly into the boy's chest. Anasilla fixed her son with a sly smile, teasing that he still couldn't dodge even that. Cyan winced, admitting it stung. The brown-haired woman looked down at him with a mischievous glint, commanding him to hold still. Then she turned her gaze toward the man, calling out to get his attention. She fixed Hazare with a deadly glare, questioning whether the boy truly possessed no magical abilities. The teacher glanced nervously at the ground before confirming it was true. The boy was Gerard's son and completely devoid of any magical power. Seal stared at her mother in astonishment as the dark-haired woman asked how it was possible that her brother had lost. With a composed look, Seal explained to Anasilla that the moment the duel started, Eugene had caught her brother off guard with a sudden spear strike, and though he tried to rise, Eugene's spear was quicker. Anasilla shot a displeased glare at Seal, questioning how the outcome of the battle could hinge on a single blow. Cyan scowled, his eyes fixed on the floor. He cast a guilty glance towards his mother. Anasilla struck her son sharply on the cheek, her face burning with fury as she glared at him. She demanded how he could lose a duel he had initiated in front of the crowd to a boy his own age who had no magical talents whatsoever. Staring straight ahead with simmering rage, Anisilla declared that their father would be utterly mortified by the disgrace at the blood ritual, wondering how he could ever meet his eyes again, already picturing Theanyu's mocking her mercilessly. Tears welled in Cyan's eyes as he pleaded with his mother for forgiveness. Anisilla shot an irritated look at Hazare and sharply called out to him. She glared fiercely at the teacher, her eyes burning with malice. The brunette remarked that she would gladly put an end to him herself. Fortunately for the teacher, her husband held him in high regard, insisting that the training be intensified so that Cyan would not suffer another disgrace. The brunette waved dismissively, signaling the teacher to escort Cyan away. Tears streaming down his face, Cyan departed accompanied by his array. The brunette stood silently, her back turned as she gazed toward the door. Anisilla unfurled her fan, using it to partially conceal her face as she let out a deep sigh. Peeking from beneath her fan, Anisilla fixed her serious gaze on her daughter before directing her full attention toward her. The brunette smiled faintly, revealing that the boy's name was Eugene, and suggesting that she try to become closer to him. Seal looked at her mother in confusion, questioning why the brunette claimed he was already powerful enough to defeat her brother. Anisilla peered forward with a cunning expression, thinking that if it were up to her, she would eliminate him immediately, but she knew she would be the prime suspect. Her mind drifted to visions of warriors. She realized that any family discord would prompt the defenders of tradition to intervene, an interference that must be avoided at all costs. The brunette raised her index finger, instructing her to keep a close eye on him. The girl returned her mother's smile, agreeing wholeheartedly and expressing her own eagerness to learn more about him. Anisilla's eyes narrowed slightly as a faint smile played on her lips. The next day, Eugene observed 3 children from the distant branches arriving at the main family estate. The 3 boys stood side by side, Deacon, 11 years old, Hansen, 14, and Juiz, 10. The protagonist was sprinting while carrying weights, sweat streaming down his face from the intense workout. The maid called out to the protagonist with eager excitement. He paused and turned to face her. Nina mentioned that they had already arrived. Eugene asked what she meant by those 2 from their side branches, nodding they seemed early since she expected them only by evening. Nina looked at the boy in shock, revealing that the head of the family had come along with them. The protagonist fixed a serious gaze on the maid, his mind turning over thoughts about the leader of the Lionheart family. Nina waved her hand nervously, urging him to hurry and greet the visitor, adding he should change his clothes first. Eugene replied, insisting he'd be the one running late if he did. He dabbed his face with a towel and assured that it was fine. He would go immediately just as he was. Night had fallen, and a crowd of people had gathered in a line near the entrance gate. The protagonist cast a sideways glance. A brown-haired woman stood beside her children, smiling warmly. Eugene recognized her as Anisilla, the second wife, positioned next to Cyan and Seal. The woman ahead of Anisilla bore a stern, intimidating expression. Eugene realized this must be Theanyu's, the first wife, accompanied by that man. The boy stared ahead, his face etched with worry. The protagonist recognized him as Gilead Lionheart, the eldest son and primary heir of the central family. Figures gradually emerged, their silhouettes appearing before the gate. A man sat astride a horse, with a young man standing just behind him. The man fixed his gaze forward, wearing a threatening expression. This was Gilead Lionheart. The young man walked ahead, a faint smile on his lips. Eugene speculated that this might be Gina's younger brother following behind. Yod kept his eyes cast downward, his face betraying nervousness. Gilead approached his son with a warm smile, nodding how much taller he had grown and inquiring if his strength had grown as well. Yoda lowered his eyes and earnestly replied that he would strive to meet his father's expectations. Gilead shot the boy a sharp, penetrating glance. He then shifted his focus to Anisilla, turning his attention fully. Spreading his arms wide, Gilead smiled broadly at the children, remarking how quickly they were growing, while Seal complained that they were feeling bored. The family patriarch greeted the man warmly, addressing him by name, Guilford. Placing his hand over his heart, Gilead smiled faintly and mentioned having heard about Guilford's son, then apologized for not being present during that joyful occasion. Guilford looked back at the family head with visible excitement. Gilead redirected his attention to the children, speculating that they were offspring of collateral family branches. The patriarch gestured invitingly to the side, proposing that they share a meal together. He looked straight ahead and announced they would also be discussing the blood ritual. The children and the family head gathered around the table to convene. Gilad settled beside his descendants, quietly observing the gathering. The protagonist positioned himself across from the other children, engaging with them. With solemn expressions, Garguis and Desira, the girl and boy, sat together, their focus unwavering. The protagonist glanced sideways, reflecting that they must have arrived at the ceremony through the portal alongside the leader, pondering whether their families were the most esteemed among the collateral branches. The blond man smiled gently, eyes softly closed. Eugene wondered who he was and questioned if the dinner was reserved solely for ceremony participants. Seal shifted her gaze toward the blonde individual, intrigued. Curious, she looked to her father and quietly inquired about the stranger's identity. Gilad indicated the boy, mentioning he had intended to introduce their guest later, but the blonde interrupted, suggesting the moment was now appropriate. Eugene sipped his tea, focusing intently on the blonde man's words. The boy beamed broadly, extending his palms in a warm gesture. He greeted the group cheerfully, revealing that he was a Rovirian from the Red Tower. The children stared at the blond man in astonishment, surprised to hear he was indeed Rovirian. Yod gazed in shock at the Rovirian just as Eugene choked on his tea. Yod exclaimed that the man was the leader of the Red Magic Tower. Eugene clutched his chest, overwhelmed by the revelation. The Rovirian eyed the protagonist cautiously, asking if he was all right. Eugene quickly assured him he was fine. Perplexed, the protagonist imagined Senya and the Rovirian beneath her, realizing that as leader of the Red Magic Tower, he must be Senya's disciple, or more precisely, the successor to her previous disciples. Eugene reminisced about how Senya mastered the arcane knowledge documented in the ancient books, noting that 300 years ago, she became the youngest ever appointed to lead the prestigious Green Tower of Araf. He emphasized her exceptional ability to update all magical grimoires, serving as a vital resource for both students and the leaders of other magic towers. In the presence of the Rovirian head of the Green Tower, Eugene formally introduced himself, remarking that even now, the gratitude and respect from the leaders of the Green Tower and the Rovirian community persisted. Both the leader of the Red Tower and the head of the Green Tower regarded the wise Senya as their revered mentor and guiding light. Gilad fixed his gaze on Eugene, who sensed that Gilad had not anticipated encountering someone connected to his distant past in that place. Eugene stared in surprise at the family patriarch as Gilad addressed him, revealing that he knew Eugene's name from stories told by Theanus. Gilad gave the young man a stern look before mentioning that his daughter had accused Eugene and his father of insults. Sion pressed his lips tightly, a look of fear creeping over him as he avoided eye contact, lowering his gaze to the floor. With a serious expression, the protagonist met Gilad's eyes and admitted the truth of the accusations, yet firmly declared he bore no resentment. The head of the family glared menacingly at the boy, asserting his authority was justified because he had won their contest. Clenching his fist, Eugene asserted that even in defeat, nothing would have changed. If he were too weak to defend his honor, he would have no choice but to endure the insults silently. The family leader smirked with satisfaction, declaring that Eugene had proven himself superior to his own son. Sion sat down, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. The head of the family cast a disappointed glance at his son, explaining that he wasn't ashamed of the defeat itself, but deeply saddened by how cowardly he looked, avoiding eye contact. Sion stared down at the floor, stunned, while the boys around them watched closely, their eyes fixed on every movement. Gilad admonished his son, reminding him that he had initiated the fight by insulting Eugene, and yet, after losing, he hadn't even offered an apology. Confused, Sion lifted his gaze to meet his father's stern expression, trying to grasp the gravity of his words. With a grave expression, Gilad told his son that as a Lionheart and a direct descendant of the legendary Burma, his blood demanded not only self-respect but something far greater. He emphasized that honoring others' dignity was equally essential. Sion glanced confusedly at the protagonist, uncertain about his father's expectations. Reluctantly, he blushed and muttered a hesitant apology to Eugene, barely able to face him. The protagonist revealed his displeasure through a tight-lipped grimace, immediately sensing that the apology lacked sincerity. Gilad fixed the protagonist with a menacing stare and asked if his father was Gerard, then, quickly adding an apology, he admitted he'd never met him personally. The protagonist met the family head's gaze seriously, affirming his understanding and adding his belief that their lineage truly came from the wilderness. A massive chandelier hung overhead as Gilad inquired whether his father had overseen his training. Eugene explained he had laid the groundwork, after which Cyan continued his training independently. Desira watched the boy with surprise, her curiosity piqued by the idea that he trained alone without any mentor guiding him. Gargus averted his gaze with disdain, perplexed by how he had managed to overcome Cyan. Gilad beamed with satisfaction, remarking that the upcoming ritual promised to be quite the spectacle. Without warning, the maids entered the room carrying trays laden with food. They carefully arranged plates before each of the boys at the table. An array of exquisite dishes adorned the table, pleasing to both eye and palate. The family patriarch smiled warmly as he extended his hand, confessing uncertainty about whether the food would please them, but suggested they indulge since he imagined they must be starving. Above the mansion, the full moon cast a luminous glow. After the meal, the maids quietly gathered the empty plates from the table. The boys took their seats once more at the now cleared table. Wiping his mouth with a handkerchief, Gilad reminded them that, as he had previously mentioned, the purpose of this dinner was to inform them about the blood ritual. The boys gazed at Gilad with eager anticipation, while Eugene remained composed and calm. Seal and Cyan listened attentively to their father's words as Gilad explained that, though it might sound strange coming from the family head, he believed the ritual's traditions placed participants at a severe disadvantage. Displaying the lion crest, the patriarch explained that its benefits were exclusive to direct descendants, because, until the ritual began, children from side branches were barred from wielding true weapons or magic. Gilad envisioned a duel among the children, emphasizing how this rule inherently stripped the side branch offspring of any real chance to triumph. Yod's eyes shone with excitement as he looked to his father, who revealed that, this time, 3 of his children would take part in the ritual. The family patriarch gazed sternly at the children and declared that he wished not only for these youngsters, but for all Lionheart descendants to showcase their talents. He emphasized that the purpose of this solemn rite was to prove their worthiness to bear the prestigious name of Bermat, regardless of whether they descended directly or not. The protagonist bowed his head thoughtfully, his mind drifting to Bermat. Peering out from beneath his bangs, he wore a contented smile as he reflected on how much gentler his descendant was compared to himself. With a warm smile, Adelaide gestured toward Rovirian, announcing that this time, they would receive assistance from an unexpected ally. Rovirian explained that was precisely why he had come, then snapped his fingers decisively. A glowing blue labyrinth materialized on the table, and Rovirian pointed to it, his smile bright with anticipation. He revealed that during this blood ritual they would enter a labyrinth he had designed, each through their own unique entrance, with their mission to defeat the central guardian, the main monster at the heart of the maze. Rovirian indicated the monstrous figure, explaining that naturally, reaching it would require overcoming numerous traps and battling other creatures along the way. Picking up the monster figurine, the blonde reminded them that it was merely an illusion he had crafted, so everything they would face was unreal, just a creation of their own imagination. With a sly grin, the blonde shattered the figurine and warned that despite its illusory nature, the sensations experienced would feel every bit as real as if they were genuinely there. The protagonist flashed a satisfied grin, confident that he would wield not only summoning magic but also advanced electronics, proving why he truly deserved his role as the head of the magic tower. The blonde introduced the triumphant monster, explaining that once any participant defeated the main creature, the ritual would conclude, and points would be awarded based on individual performance. Hansen looked at Rovirian eagerly and inquired whether it was acceptable if they failed to escape the labyrinth. Rovirian smiled awkwardly and assured him it was fine. If fear took hold, they could simply remain calmly at the starting point, though that would prevent them from achieving a high score. Curious, the protagonist turned to the tower's leader, and Eugene asked what rewards awaited those who defeated the main monster. The family head smiled contentedly and closed his eyes in satisfaction. With a subtle grin, Gilad told Eugene that the victor would earn the privilege to claim anything they desired from the underground treasury. The protagonist beamed with happiness, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. Eugene strode purposefully down the corridor. Fixing his gaze straight ahead with a cunning smirk, Eugene mused that since he was sure to win the ritual, he should start considering what treasures he would choose from the underground vault. The protagonist stared ahead, visibly bewildered. On his path, Garguis and Desiree intercepted him. Garguis regarded Eugene with an air of arrogance. Crossing his arms, Garguis challenged Eugene, questioning whether he had truly defeated Cyan. The protagonist glanced at the man with a detached expression, affirming that he did know. Eugene strode past the group, waving dismissively, and declared that if that was all they wanted to ask, he was leaving. Garguis reached out his hand toward Eugene confidently. He glanced at his sister, perplexed by her reaction. Under the cover of the night sky, the protagonist was deeply engrossed in his training. He skillfully wielded the wooden sword, each swing executed with precision. Eugene's eyes sparked with intensity as he launched his powerful strike. His blow kicked up thick clouds of dust that swirled around him. The protagonist glanced over his shoulder, spotting Garguis and Desera watching him. Desiree held a pair of wooden spears firmly in her hands, poised and ready. The protagonist stared at the men, baffled and unsure why they were present. With unwavering confidence, Garguis strode directly toward Eugene. Standing beside the protagonist, he clenched his fists tightly. The man abruptly slipped off his shirt with a sharp, fluid motion. Taking a deep breath, he raised his hands in front of him, preparing himself. He tensed every muscle in his body, displaying raw strength. The protagonist looked at the man, puzzled by his behavior. His eyes widened in disbelief, silently branding the man a fool. Patting his chest boastfully, the man invited Eugene to touch it, to which Eugene replied that he'd likely decline. Garguis boasted about his physique, explaining that their family possesses a secret muscle-building technique passed down through generations. He pictured muscular men and revealed they used a special drug that accelerates muscle growth without storing mana, assuring there were no side effects. Garguis leaned back, hands clasped behind his head, and asked Eugene if he was interested. The protagonist explained he was there to sell pills, assuring that they came with absolutely no side effects. Desera approached Eugene alongside spears, warning that the drug caused both boys and girls to grow beards. With a serious expression, the girl stared at Eugene and mentioned rumors that he had defeated Cyan with a spear, questioning why he now held a wooden sword instead. Eugene tossed the sword casually over his shoulder, asserting confidently that he mastered both spear and sword equally well. Desera challenged him, asking what he meant by claiming proficiency with any weapon, and then hurled the spear straight at Eugene. With swift reflexes, he caught the spear midair without hesitation. Standing poised for combat, Desera declared the spear was her specialty and asked what he thought about having a sparring match. Eugene averted his gaze, pondering silently that this girl was undoubtedly a far more intriguing opponent than the pill dealer. A sly grin crossed Eugene's face as he admitted he was curious to see how the noble offspring would perform in battle. He told Desera he was ready to spar. Both boys assumed their fighting stances, preparing for the duel ahead. Eugene glanced at Garguis and asked why he was still around. Garguis replied that he intended to serve as the referee. Closing his eyes, Garguis raised his hand and reminded them that although this was just sparring, all rules must be strictly followed. Eugene pictured Maron with a puzzled expression, reflecting that this fool reminded him of someone and wondering if perhaps, by chance, he really was Maron. Desera glared at her brother with annoyance as Garguis announced that the team was ready to begin. She insisted they didn't need to rush him, signaling her understanding. Desera glanced forward with irritation, finding it absurd that he wielded both a sword and a spear simultaneously. Barreling her teeth in frustration, the girl resolved to prove that only those fully dedicated could master the art of wielding a spear skillfully. Lowering his hand decisively, Garguis commanded the team to commence. The girl shifted from her position, her mind set on one outcome, victory or death. Suddenly her eyes widened in surprise. Desera came to an abrupt halt as a powerful aura radiated from the protagonist. The protagonist's confident gaze held steady, convincing Desera he was resolutely holding his ground. With evident confusion, the protagonist stared at the girl, silently questioning what was troubling her. Desera snarled fiercely. Without hesitation, she opened her mouth and lunged forward, launching a swift attack toward Eugene. Eugene skillfully deflected the assault using his spear. Eugene maintained his stance, remaining perfectly still in one spot. Gritting her teeth, Desera launched another fierce assault against the protagonist. Eugene successfully blocked the incoming strike. Desera scowled deeply at the protagonist, clearly displeased. Time after time, the protagonist parried each of the girl's relentless attacks. Eugene monitored every move attentively, impressed by her combat skills without magic, recognizing the boundless potential she possessed. The protagonist smirked slyly, thinking to himself that, for now, she was no match for him. Once again, Eugene skillfully parried the girl's attack. He grinned cruelly, mocking her with a sarcastic challenge. Why couldn't she land a hit on him? Desera bared her teeth in frustration, questioning why he remained rooted in place to block her strikes, warning that such overconfidence would be his downfall. With fierce determination, the girl lunged forward, spear swinging directly at Eugene. Continuously, the protagonist deflected each blow with unwavering focus. Suddenly, Desera sprang to the side with swift agility. She appeared behind the protagonist, moving silently and swiftly. A faint, confident smile crossed Desera's lips as she believed he couldn't block her strike from that unexpected angle. Desera charged fiercely, aiming a sudden attack at the protagonist. Eugene lifted his foot just above the spear's shaft, preparing to counter. Then with deliberate force, he stepped down firmly onto the spear. Using every ounce of strength, Eugene pressed the spear blade into the ground, pinning it solidly. Gritting her teeth, Desera struggled intensely to free the spear from his grasp. Suddenly, the protagonist's spear appeared inches from her face, blocking her advance. Eugene held his spear firmly before Desera's eyes, halting her weapon's movement. With surprise, Dargais announced that Eugene Lionheart was the victor of the duel. Crossing his arms, Dargais fixed his gaze on the protagonist and proposed they join forces. The protagonist lay stunned in bed, staring at the man with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Eugene frowned with irritation, snapping, "Why did you wake me up just for this?" Meeting Eugene's gaze confidently, Dargais insisted that he needed an answer without delay. Raising his hand thoughtfully, Eugene recalled hearing from the family head that everyone must enter through their own path in the ritual, questioning how he was supposed to manage that. The man pictured the monster and the twins, explaining that although their entry points differed, their ultimate destination was the same, the labyrinth's center, where the main monster resided. He added that the twins would eventually join forces there. Eugene regarded the man with indifference and asked if he was suggesting they meet at the labyrinth's core to defeat the main monster together. The man confirmed this exactly. Eugene clenched his fist, insisting he could handle the challenge alone. Desera immediately called him a fool. Eugene cast a sideways glance at Desera, who was pressed against the wall. The girl averted her gaze awkwardly, admitting he was strong but that with her support, together they stood a real chance to conquer the main monster. She stepped back from the wall, and Eugene inquired why she felt so compelled to succeed. With a serious expression, the protagonist faced Desera, who explained that whenever children from both the direct and lateral lineages entered the blood ritual simultaneously, none from the lateral branch had ever emerged victorious. Desera moved closer to her brother, reassuring Eugene that together they could succeed, then she gently squeezed his arm. Looking earnestly at Eugene, Desera asked if he truly had no desire to defeat the main family. Eugene met her gaze with unwavering confidence. Anisilla stood silently by the window, lost in thought. She envisioned Rovirian with a sinister glare and speculated that perhaps the head of the magic tower, who had been invited to the ritual, had arrived to select Yod as his apprentice. Anisilla recalled Yod's lifelong disinterest in physical training, nodding that since childhood his true passion lay in reading. While he showed some curiosity about magic, it was his dedication to books that defined him, and he even managed to grasp certain magical concepts through sheer study. The girl pictured Rovirian taking Yod and his children away. She reflected that if Yod became the apprentice to the head of the Red Magic Tower, he would be forced to leave his family behind. This, she realized, would leave Cyan and Sale more room to develop, while Yod would effectively forfeit his chance to inherit. The brown-haired girl fixed a fierce glare ahead, convinced that the root of their problems lay in the ritual itself. Anisilla envisioned herself with children, mocking others as she recalled that if her offspring failed, they would carry the burden of shame indefinitely. She added that, until now, she had always stood her ground and achieved every goal she set. Anisilla nervously gripped her fan, plagued by the fear that she might be bested by a child from some distant branch of the family. The brown-haired girl clenched her fists in anger, seething at the thought that if that scoundrel were the first to emerge from the labyrinth. With a displeased expression, Anisilla introduced Eugene, reflecting that if his extraordinary talents humiliated the main family, then Cyan's defeat would seem less conspicuous in comparison. 3 days later, Rovirian and the others stood solemnly by the portal. The long-awaited blood ritual had finally commenced. Rovirian focused intently as he summoned swirling blue energy into his palms. From that magical force, glowing blue spheres began to emerge. The luminous spheres gently settled into the twins' open hands. Soon after, an identical set of spheres materialized in the young man's hands. The blond man smiled subtly, raised a finger, and declared that their first task would be to craft equipment. He instructed each person to envision their desired weapon and shape it from light. The boys gripped the spheres, both startled and curious about what would happen next. With unwavering certainty, Seal molded one sphere into a sleek, shining sword. She examined her newly formed weapon with genuine delight. Seal began to skillfully swing her sword, testing its balance and strength. Rovirian closed his eyes, giving an awkward smile as the girl asked what would happen if the sword broke. he assured her it was impossible, just like the labyrinth, since it was forged through magic. Surprised, Seal asked if animals could also be conjured. The tower leader explained that while puppets and golems could be created, summoning living creatures was forbidden. The elder gazed at the tower leader in confusion and asked for the reason behind this restriction. With a broad smile and a raised finger, the tower leader revealed that in the realm of magic, creating life was prohibited and reserved solely for higher powers. Yod observed the tower leader intently, intrigued by this revelation. Gargus shaped a massive two-handed sword from his sphere with precision. He casually tossed the sword over his shoulder and, glancing at his sister, admitted it was his favorite weapon, the one he trained with at home, now transformed from wood to a solid magical form, expressing amazement that it had materialized exactly as he envisioned it. Desera challenged him, demanding to know who he was speaking to since no one had asked, while conjuring a spear in her hands. Cyan summoned a gleaming sword, materializing it firmly in his grasp. The elder regarded the sword he had formed with a somber, downcast expression. The boys exchanged puzzled glances as they stared at the swords now resting in their hands. Meanwhile, the protagonist crafted a compact sword alongside a sturdy shield. Seal fixed her gaze on the protagonist, inquiring what his course of action would be if they crossed paths within the labyrinth. Tilting her head curiously, Seal questioned whether he intended to battle her. The protagonist sought confirmation from the head of the family, who replied that the labyrinth held no restrictions, and competition formed the very foundation of their ritual. Gilad placed his palm over his heart and smiled faintly as the family leader explained that this time, depending on the situation, they would need to showcase both their analytical prowess and teamwork, since they were all part of the same Lionheart family. Seal glared at the protagonist, a flicker of embarrassment passing over her face as she contemplated the idea of one united family. The girl shot a wicked grin toward Eugene, her expression laced with mischief. The protagonist stared at the girl, a wave of unease unexpectedly washing over him. The tower's leader began retrieving a pendant from the magical circle, instructing everyone who had forged a weapon to now don the pendant around their necks. Provirian proceeded to distribute the pendants among the boys, ensuring each received one. The boys stared in astonishment at the shimmering blue pendant. The tower leader explained that this pendant would link directly to their minds and would activate whenever they experienced intense stress within the labyrinth. Fixing them with a stern gaze, the tower leader warned that he would step in if the situation spiraled beyond control. The protagonist glanced down at the pendant hanging around his neck, pondering whether it served as a safeguard against unforeseen dangers. The tower leader opened his mouth wide and tapped his chest emphatically. He instructed them that if they ever felt trapped without escape in the labyrinth, they should knock on the stone pendant and call out for help, assuring that this action would grant them a swift exit. Rovirian gestured toward the portal, declaring that his explanations were complete and that they should all proceed calmly into the cave together. With a sly grin, Rovirian informed the group that although there was a single entrance, each individual would embark on a unique path within. Filled with confidence, the group began steadily making their way toward the cave. Seal smiled brightly and waved encouragingly at Eugene, wishing him the best of luck. In return, the protagonist offered her his own good wishes. Without hesitation, Eugene dashed into the portal. He emerged on the far side of the cavern. Before him stretched a vast, shadowy corridor engulfed in darkness. The protagonist recalled navigating this very passageway with his team. He realized that in his former life he had faced countless similar labyrinths. Eugene tilted his head back, eyes tracing the ceiling, realizing climbing was impossible since the walls pressed firmly against it. The protagonist brandished his sword defiantly in front of him. His sword's edge barely grazed the wall surface. With a serious expression, Eugene surveyed his sword, nodding that turning around was nearly impossible here, especially unwieldy with such a lengthy weapon in the cramped space. He glanced at his weapon with quiet satisfaction, acknowledging that this is precisely why he chose the classic sword and shield, the dependable duo that excels in nearly every scenario. Eugene smirked subtly, confident that a maze designed for children should pose little challenge. Determined, the protagonist shifted from his spot, declaring it was time to proceed. Malevolent Slime surged forward with wicked grins. In a mix of fear and urgency, Deacon swung his sword at the approaching slimes. He collapsed to the ground, pounding the crystal desperately, crying out for help. Suddenly, Rovirian materialized beside Deacon within the labyrinth, pressing his palm against the crystal to teleport them away. The family patriarch reflected grimly, Although under an hour had elapsed since the blood ritual began, 3 had already escaped the labyrinth. Hansen, Deacon, and Jui stood there, their faces shadowed by guilt. Gilad fixed the boys with a fierce, intimidating glare. Frowning in frustration, he ordered them inside to rest. The boys cast their eyes downward, weighed down by sadness. Together, Gilad and Rovirian observed the boys confined within the spheres. Lost in thought, Gilad gazed intently at the spheres. Garguis unleashed a powerful swing of his massive two-handed sword toward the goblins. He scowled intensely, steeling himself to launch another attack. His enormous sword became lodged firmly in the stone wall. The goblin grinned wickedly as it stared at the trapped blade. Garguis opened his mouth wide in surprise and frustration. With a fierce strike, he shattered the wall using his sword. Harnessing the sword's strength, he swung decisively, beheading several goblins in a single strike. Immediately after, the fallen goblins dissolved into thin air. The boy stared ahead with confidence. Gilad observed that Garguis moved toward his objective with awkward persistence, effortlessly dispatching every monster along his path. Desera appeared clearly within the glowing sphere. Hostile slimes suddenly emerged right before the girl. Desera skillfully evaded the slimes' relentless attacks with swift agility. She expertly thrust her spear, piercing through one of the gelatinous creatures. The girl clenched her teeth in frustration, realizing that using a spear against slimes was challenging and that she had to await the perfect moment. Desera charged forward without hesitation, frequently glancing back at her adversaries. She walked confidently onward. Gilad thought Desera was clever and her instincts right. Nodding, she avoided unnecessary fights, focusing instead on escaping the labyrinth. Zion's image became visible within the sphere. Ahead of him loomed a wall riddled with holes. Remembering his studies, Zion smirked knowingly. Before the ritual, his mother had discovered several labyrinth diagrams, and after analyzing them, they had devised a strategy. Now, neither he nor Seal would fall prey to such obvious traps. Zion stooped to scoop up a small stone from the ground. He hurled the stone sharply towards the wall. As the stone flew when it struck the wall, a volley of arrows suddenly emerged. Once the arrows depleted, the boy dashed forward without hesitation. Zion smiled faintly as he looked ahead. Gilad believed Zion was perhaps overly cautious, yet this vigilance allowed him to skillfully evade traps, which was impressive. Seal positioned herself directly before the goblin. The goblin swung his sword, aggressively aimed at the girl. With swift agility, Seal evaded the goblin's strike. She quickly thrust her weapon, piercing the goblin's head. Instantly, the goblin dissolved into a wisp of smoke. Seal continued onward, wearing a victorious grin. Ahead, Seal encountered a dead end. Noting the lack of any passage, she decided to backtrack to the previous fork. Desera looked up thoughtfully. She reflected that while Seal possessed sharp perception and quick thinking, her behavior sometimes resembled that of a child. Zion looked at the goblin perplexed. The goblin grinned with a savage, bloodthirsty gleam. Holding his sword aloft, Yod stared admiringly at his adversary, marveling at how this creature had been conjured through magic. The boy leaned to the side just as the monster swung its weapon at him. He parried the monster's strike expertly. In a swift motion, he decapitated the foe with his blade. The monster vanished immediately after. Delighted, the boy watched the magical sparks flicker where the creature had disappeared. Rovirian observed the gleeful Yod thoughtfully, nodding his evident fascination with magic. The family patriarch closed his eyes and offered a faint smile. Gilad confessed that his fascination had begun in childhood. Even renowned magic professors from the capital had been invited to mentor him. Yet, he ultimately chose to abandon his magical studies. The tower's leader gazed at the family head with a puzzled look, asking what had prompted this decision. Gilad recalled his first wife as he explained that he had accepted his fate. Out of loyalty to his mother, he resolved to assume the family leadership, recognizing that magic offered no real advantage in the battle for succession. The tower's head stared ahead, his expression heavy with resignation. He acknowledged that magic held boundless potential but warned that mastering it entailed formidable challenges and risks. Gilad then urged him to cast aside his doubts and embrace his destined path. Frowning, the family leader regarded Rovirian and said that if his passion for magic still burned within him, he should accept the invitation to apprentice at the Red Magic Tower. Rovirian faced forward with a grave expression, admitting he could not offer a definitive answer just yet. The tower's head fixed a serious gaze on the family patriarch and told Gilad that for his sake he might accept Yod into the tower. However, if Yod's talents proved insufficient, he would not take him on as a student. The family patriarch smiled gently, clarifying that he was not imposing anything. he simply wished for his son to fulfill his aspirations. He pictured Senya smiling and admitted that he, a descendant of the illustrious Burmat, held profound admiration for her wisdom. Reverian closed his eyes, envisioning Senya's magical prowess. He confessed understanding her deeply, recalling how, in the heroic adventures of Burmat, he was always drawn more to Senya's tales. Each time their group faced danger, she ingeniously used magic to save them. The family patriarch gazed at Reverian with a contented smile and revealed that he had cherished that book since childhood, though, to be honest, his favorite hero was Burmat or Senya. Reverian looked at Gilad inquisitively and asked, "Who is it?" Gilad fixed his gaze forward with a grin and said, "He is the one I admire most." Surprised, Reverian glanced at the family head and asked what he meant. Gilad urged him to take a closer look. With a steady finger, he pointed directly at the glowing sphere. Eugene stood boldly before a towering monster. The goblin swung his fist violently, slamming it into the ground. But the hero swiftly evaded the attack. Our young champion vanished from the monster's sight in an instant. Eugene relentlessly delivered powerful blows to the goblin. The tower chief and Gilad stared at the boy in astonishment as Reverian asked, "Who is he?" Gilad looked on the protagonist with admiration, exclaiming, "He's incredible." Eugene landed firmly to the ground, having slain the monster. The protagonist faced forward with unwavering confidence as Reverian declared, "His name is Eugene Lionheart." Behind him, the massive, defeated beast lay sprawling on the ground. The goblin vanished instantly, dissolving into thin air without a trace. Reverian and Gilad stared in stunned disbelief at the unfolding scene. Gilad beamed broadly and exclaimed how remarkable it was, highlighting that at just 13, he had never faced a troll before. He added that not only did the boy remain calm, but he also confronted the challenge with admirable courage and without any hesitation. Reverian gazed ahead, bewildered. He explained that trolls were meant to be obstacles to navigate around using clever tactics rather than adversaries to conquer. He noted this troll was also larger than normal and confessed he couldn't believe the boy had defeated it so effortlessly. Gilad smiled with satisfaction as he looked toward the tower's summit, remarking that such feats were possible when a child was born with exceptional abilities. Reverian turned to the family patriarch in confusion and asked if he knew what name was given to children like this. Reverian pictured Eugene standing firm with Burmat at his back, confidently declaring that such children were true prodigies. Suddenly, the troll launched a powerful swing with its massive fist. Dargais intercepted the attack, blocking it skillfully with his sword. The impact slammed him backward, sending him crashing through the air. Dargais hit the ground hard, teeth clenched tightly against the pain. A towering troll loomed menacingly before the wounded boy. The boy threw his head back and let out a fierce, piercing scream. He charged wildly toward the monstrous creature with unyielding determination. With a brutal strike, the troll was driven to the ground as Dargais swung his sword with precision. The boy's eyes blazed with fury as he severed the monster's leg in a swift, decisive blow. The troll collapsed heavily to the earth, incapacitated. Dargais leapt into the air, wielding his sword with deadly intent. The boy drove his sword deep into the troll's chest, ending the battle decisively. The creature unleashed a guttural roar, its mouth stretched wide in agonizing torment. His hand trembled uncontrollably. The troll's grasp slipped, its hand collapsing lifelessly to the earth. Weary and drained, Dargais fixed his gaze on the fallen beast. He stretched his arms wide apart, opening his mouth in a deep, wordless cry. The man collapsed onto the ground the instant the monster vanished into mist. Dargais sat down heavily, his face bruised and worn with exhaustion. Clenching his teeth, he pressed his hand against his ribs, concluding that his blows must have pierced deep enough to shatter muscles and break bones. After all, these creatures possessed immense strength. He dragged his sword feebly behind him, realizing that beyond the relentless traps, they now faced a troll as well. And if he felt so battered, the others were likely just as wounded. Dargais collapsed to the ground, utterly drained of energy. Cyan stood firm, clutching a stone poised before the beast. Cyan's eyes widened in disbelief as he confronted the monster, realizing a troll had appeared and sensing fiercer foes were on their way. With a furrowed brow, Cyan seethed at being nothing more than an obstacle blocking his path to his treasured objective. Without hesitation, Cyan tossed the stone aside. The troll snapped alertly toward the noise. Seizing the moment, Cyan sprinted past the monster. Casting a cunning glance behind him, the boy smiled slyly, confident that he had outmaneuvered the troll. Cyan pressed onward, dashing deeper into the labyrinth's winding corridors. Seal's eyes widened in shock as she spotted her brother ahead. Cyan's jaw dropped in astonishment upon seeing his sister. They found themselves facing each other, and Seal furrowed her brow in confusion, wondering how they managed to meet despite starting at opposite ends of the labyrinth. Her brother suggested it was probably because the center had already been sealed off. Their faces lit up with genuine enthusiasm as the brother praised his sister, then encouraged her to follow him, assuring her he would guide them safely out. Fueled by rage, Cyan furiously replayed how the main character had mocked him. He remembered how, just days ago, that fool Eugene publicly humiliated him right in front of Cell, and now he finally had the chance to reclaim his honor. The young man cast a sly grin at his sister just as she was about to ask him a question. Her eyes went wide with astonishment as she asked if the labyrinth was merely an illusion, and if that were true, whether they could accidentally encounter any monsters. Trailing behind her brother, she inquired if ghosts might appear in the labyrinth, prompting his affirmative reply in surprise at her query. Cyan stared ahead, his expression heavy with defeat and discouragement. He shrugged with open arms and asked her what exactly she was afraid of. With a mocking glance to the side, he told his sister not to fret, promising that no matter what threats they faced, he would confront anyone with his sword. Suddenly, a bloodied silhouette of a man materialized right before him. A horrified scream escaped his lips. Seal watched in alarm as her brother, alongside Desera, let out a terrified scream. Cyan pointed in bewilderment, recognizing Desera and bewildered by her presence there. She clutched her chest nervously, explaining she was frightened herself because Cyan's sudden scream had startled her. The man spread his legs firmly, his face twisting with anger as he demanded to know why the girl was covered in blood, suspecting she was trying to intimidate him before launching a surprise attack. Stepping forward calmly, the girl explained that she had been injured by one of the traps. She frowned fiercely, realizing that her element of surprise had been completely compromised. Without hesitation, she turned sharply and began to storm away, her face burning with anger. Seal shouted urgently to her brother, warning him that Desera was trying to escape. They exchanged furious glances, both realizing that because of this girl, he had only humiliated himself further in front of his sister. His brow furrowed deeply with anger, unwilling to forgive her, he started to chase after Desera, determined to catch up. Without wasting a moment, they broke into a run, pursuing her rapidly. Desera bared her teeth in frustration, aware that she couldn't fend them off alone and frantically wondered where her strong friend Gargaz had disappeared to. Meanwhile, he lay unconscious on the ground, unable to help. Horrified, the girl sprinted onto the crumbling slabs, realizing the danger beneath her feet. She snarled fiercely, recognizing that she had walked into a trap with no easy escape. With quick reflexes, she dashed across the section where the floor suddenly gave way. She leapt onto the unstable slabs, managing to jump just far enough to avoid falling. Behind her, her brother and sister were running hard to catch up. Cyan gazed ahead in disbelief as he saw the floor had collapsed completely. The gap was too wide to cross, meaning they'd have to find an alternate route. His sister surged forward enthusiastically, and he realized that he couldn't afford to fall any further in Seal's estimation. He scowled intensely, realizing he had held back earlier when facing lesser foes. Now, confronting the main monster, he was ready to unleash his full power. Fueled by anger, he charged ahead with his aura blazing, fully aware that magic would be essential in the battle ahead. Without hesitation, he accelerated, preparing to leap over the hidden trap. He sprang off the ground instantly, propelling himself forward with agility. He successfully vaulted over the trap and landed firmly back on the floor. He quickly reached out, signaling for his sister to jump immediately after him, promising he would catch her safely. Empowered by his magic, Seal leapt effortlessly over the trap as well. Seal touched down gracefully on the ground beside her brother. Cyan glanced at his sister with a knowing grin, acknowledging that her swift action was entirely expected. Without delay, the man drew his sword, insisting they press onward. Soon, the pursuit resumed, leading Cyan, Seal, and Desera to the heart of the labyrinth. The trio stood face to face with a colossal monster dominating the labyrinth's center. Stunned, Desera and Cyan stared at the main monster, disbelief evident in their eyes. The protagonist leaned against the wall, arms folded, and calmly questioned why the three had come here together. Cyan turned around in astonishment, baffled by Eugene's unexpected presence. With a sardonic smile and crossed arms, the protagonist declared he was here to see who would arrive first.